The night Vanessa left him, the restaurant smelled like burnt garlic and failure. Rain hammered the neon sign outside Marco Bellini's tiny Italian kitchen while customers rushed past the windows without even glancing inside. Marco stood over the stove in his stained black apron, stirring sauce with one hand while helping his 6-year-old daughter Lily with her math homework using the other. The electricity flickered twice. Then the front door opened, and Vanessa walked in wearing a white designer coat he knew he could never afford. She didn't kiss him. Didn't smile. Didn't even look at Lily. "I can't do this anymore," she said coldly. Marco froze. "What?" Vanessa sighed dramatically as if she were exhausted from carrying his entire existence on her shoulders. "Look around, Marco. This place is dying. You work 16 hours a day and still can't pay rent on time." Lily looked up nervously from her coloring book. "Vanessa." Marco lowered the stove flame. Not in front of Lily. But Vanessa had already made up her mind long before entering. "I met someone," she said. The words hit harder than a punch. Marco stared silently while thunder shook the windows. "He owns hotels in Miami and Dubai," she continued. "He flies private jets, Marco. He bought me this coat yesterday." Marco swallowed hard. "So that's it. That's reality." Lily tugged Marco's sleeve. "Daddy, is she leaving?" Vanessa avoided the little girl's eyes. That told Marco everything. He slowly removed his apron and hung it beside the kitchen. "For how long?" he asked quietly. Vanessa crossed her arms. "Does it matter?" "Yes." She hesitated. 3 months. 3 months. 3 months of fake smiles. 3 months of pretending to love him, while another man paid for her luxury dinners. Marco nodded once like a man receiving a death sentence. Then Vanessa delivered the final knife twist. "You're a good man, Marco," she said. "But love doesn't pay bills." The silence afterward felt monstrous. Lily suddenly stood up. "Daddy cooks better than anybody." Vanessa looked embarrassed. "Sweetie." "No!" Lily shouted with tears in her eyes. "Daddy says rich people aren't better than us." Vanessa grabbed her purse. "This is exactly why I can't stay here. I'm tired of struggling." Then she walked out into the rain without looking back once. Marco stood there for nearly a minute staring at the closed door. The restaurant felt emptier than a graveyard. Lily finally whispered, "Daddy, are we poor?" Marco looked at his daughter. Then he smiled softly. "No, sweetheart," he said. "Not even close." But Lily didn't understand what he meant. Nobody did. Because the tiny restaurant, the old apartment, the beat-up delivery scooter parked outside. It was all a lie. Marco Bellini wasn't poor. He was hiding. 5 years earlier, Marco had been worth over $600 million. His family owned Bellini International, one of Europe's largest luxury hospitality empires. Private islands. 5-star resorts. Vineyards across Italy. Real estate empires stretching from Milan to Singapore. Marco had inherited more money than most people could spend in 10 lifetimes. But after his wife Sophia died in a car accident, everything changed. The business became meaningless. Board meetings felt disgusting. Fake friends surrounded him like vultures. Women chased his wealth instead of his heart. So Marco disappeared. He stepped away from the company, handed control to executives, and moved to a small American city with Lily under a different version of his name. Only 3 people in the world knew where he was. His lawyer, his accountant, and his old family butler in Italy. Marco bought a tiny failing restaurant because cooking was the only thing that still made him feel alive. For 5 years, he lived like an ordinary man. And for the first time in his life, people treated him honestly. At least he thought they did. Until Vanessa. That night after putting Lily to sleep, Marco sat alone in the dark restaurant. Rainwater slid down the windows while old jazz music played softly from the speakers. Then his phone rang. The screen displayed a name he hadn't seen in months. Leonardo Bellini. His older brother. Marco answered reluctantly. "What?" Leonardo laughed. "I heard the gold digger finally left." Marco's jaw tightened. "You had me followed?" "You're worth billions now, little brother. Somebody always follows you." Marco rubbed his eyes. "What do you want?" "The board meeting is in 2 weeks. The company needs a CEO again. I told you I'm done." "No," Leonardo said sharply. "You were grieving." There's a difference. Marco stayed silent. Then Leonardo added carefully. Father built an empire. But you built the technology division that tripled our fortune. Without you, the company is bleeding. Marco stared at the empty restaurant. I'm not coming back. Fine. Leonardo replied calmly. Then at least protect yourself. What does that mean? The man Vanessa left you for? Richard Holloway? Marco's expression darkened. What about him? He's trying to buy Bellini stock through offshore accounts. Marco sat upright instantly. Leonardo continued. We traced the purchases yesterday. He doesn't know you're connected to Bellini International. Marco's eyes narrowed. Richard Holloway. The millionaire Vanessa chose over him. That man was trying to infiltrate his company. Suddenly Marco understood everything. This wasn't random. Vanessa had been targeted. Or used. Leonardo's voice turned serious. Come home, Marco. Before somebody realizes who you really are. But Marco slowly smiled instead. No, he said quietly. What? I think it's time they learned. 3 nights later, Vanessa arrived at Richard Holloway's penthouse wearing a diamond necklace worth more than Marco's restaurant. The city skyline glittered behind giant glass windows while waiters served imported wine. Yet despite the luxury surrounding her, something felt wrong. Richard barely touched her anymore unless cameras were nearby. He constantly took business calls. And worst of all, he treated people horribly. Especially staff. A waitress accidentally spilled wine near his jacket that evening. Richard exploded. You incompetent idiot! He roared. Do you know how much this suit costs? The young waitress nearly cried. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. Marco would have apologized to the waitress instead. Richard noticed Vanessa's expression. What? Nothing. No, say it. Vanessa forced a smile. Marco just never talked to people like that. Richard scoffed. That's because Marco's a nobody. But somehow those words didn't feel true anymore. Because despite Marco's tiny restaurant and old clothes, he always carried himself like a king. The confidence. The calmness. The strange sadness in his eyes. It suddenly haunted her. Then Richard's phone buzzed. He checked the screen and immediately stood. I have to go. At midnight? It's business. Vanessa frowned. What kind of business? Richard grabbed his coat. The kind that'll make me richer than God. Then he left. Curiosity burned inside her. So she followed him. 20 minutes later, Richard entered a luxury hotel downtown. Vanessa parked across the street and watched nervously. Then her eyes widened. Because parked outside the hotel were black armored vehicles. Men in expensive suits entered through private security entrances. This wasn't normal business. Vanessa slipped inside carefully. The ballroom upstairs glowed with golden chandeliers and armed guards. Then she saw the giant banner displayed across the stage. Bellini International, Private Executive Summit. Her stomach dropped. She recognized that company name instantly. One of the largest luxury empires in the world. What was Richard doing here? Suddenly the crowd shifted. Security teams straightened. Executives stood immediately. The atmosphere changed completely. Someone important had arrived. Vanessa turned toward the entrance. And nearly stopped breathing. Marco walked in wearing a perfectly tailored black suit. No apron. No exhausted expression. No struggling chef. He moved through the ballroom surrounded by security and billionaires who treated him like royalty. People shook his hand nervously. Others lowered their heads respectfully. Richard Holloway himself looked stunned. Vanessa's heart pounded violently. No! Marco stepped onto the stage calmly while cameras flashed everywhere. One executive approached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, the man announced, please welcome the majority owner of Bellini International, Mr. Marco Bellini. The room erupted in applause. Vanessa physically stumbled backward. Her mind refused to process it. Marco? Her Marco? The single father chef? Impossible. Then giant screens behind the stage lit up with financial numbers. Net worth estimates. Global properties. Private holdings. Billions. Not millions. Billions. Vanessa felt sick. Richard suddenly looked terrified. Marco took the microphone slowly. His voice remained calm. 5 years ago, I disappeared from public life after losing my wife. he said. During that time, I searched for something real. The room stayed silent. Marco continued. Real people. Real loyalty. Real love. His eyes scanned the audience. Then stopped directly on Vanessa. She froze. I failed, Marco said quietly. A painful silence followed. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears instantly. Marco looked away from her. Then his expression hardened. Recently, I discovered attempts to illegally manipulate Bellini International stock through shell corporations connected to Richard Holloway. Gasps exploded across the ballroom. Richard went pale. What? He shouted. That's absurd. But security was already moving toward him. Marco calmly held up documents. Federal investigators disagree. Richard panicked. You set me up. No, Marco replied coldly. You exposed yourself. Security grabbed Richard while reporters swarmed the chaos. Vanessa couldn't move. Everything around her blurred. The man she abandoned, the man she called a failure, was richer than every person in that ballroom. But somehow that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing Marco never bragged about it. Never humiliated others. Never acted superior. He had hidden his wealth because he wanted people to love him for who he was. And she failed the test completely. Marco stepped off stage while reporters chased him. Vanessa finally found the courage to move. Marco! She shouted desperately. He stopped walking. Slowly turned. Their eyes met across the chaotic ballroom. Vanessa's voice cracked. Please, let me explain. Marco stared at her silently for several seconds. Then he walked closer. Not angry. Not emotional. That somehow hurt more. I really loved you, Vanessa whispered. Marco nodded softly. I know. Tears streamed down her face. I made a mistake. No, Marco replied calmly. You made a choice. Those words shattered her. I didn't know, she whispered weakly. Marco gave a faint sad smile. That was the point. Vanessa reached for his hand desperately. Marco, please. But suddenly a tiny voice interrupted. Daddy? Lily ran into the ballroom wearing pajamas beneath a little pink coat while Leonardo followed behind her. The moment Lily saw Vanessa, she stopped. Her expression changed instantly. Marco knelt beside his daughter. What are you doing awake? I wanted to see your big speech, Lily said proudly. Then she looked at Vanessa carefully. Are you leaving again? Vanessa broke down completely. Marco gently picked Lily up into his arms. Then he looked back at Vanessa one final time. I spent years pretending to be poor, he said quietly. But the truth is, I was richest when I was making pasta with my daughter in that tiny kitchen. Vanessa sobbed silently. Marco continued walking away. But before disappearing into the crowd, he paused. Without turning around, he said one last sentence. And you traded that for a man in a rented suit. Richard Holloway screamed furiously while federal agents dragged him through the ballroom. Vanessa watched both men disappear in opposite directions. One had everything money could buy. The other had everything money couldn't. And she had lost them both. 6 months later, Bellini International launched a culinary foundation funding restaurants owned by struggling single parents around the world. Every location carried the same name: Lily's Kitchen. Meanwhile, Marco returned to his small restaurant 3 nights a week despite owning half the city skyline. Because success no longer interested him. Peace did. One snowy evening, a black luxury car stopped outside the restaurant. Vanessa stepped out slowly. She looked thinner. Older somehow. Life with Richard had destroyed her reputation after the scandal exploded publicly. She entered nervously. The little restaurant was packed with customers laughing over pasta and candlelight. Marco stood in the kitchen cooking personally. Just like before. Except now everyone knew who he was. Yet nothing about him had changed. Vanessa approached carefully. Hi. Marco glanced up. Neither smiled. I heard this place still serves the best lasagna in town, she said awkwardly. Marco wiped his hands calmly. Table for one? The question hit her hard. Still, she nodded. Marco led her to a corner table personally. No anger. No revenge. Just distance. Vanessa looked around the restaurant quietly. This place feels happier now. Marco nodded slightly. It is. She swallowed hard. Do you hate me? Marco thought about it honestly, then shook his head. No. That answer somehow hurt even worse. Vanessa stared at him with tears gathering again. I threw away a future most people dream about. Marco looked at her calmly. No, he corrected gently. You threw away a person who would have loved you even if I had nothing. Silence. The entire restaurant buzzed warmly around them while snow fell outside the windows. Vanessa finally whispered, Is there any chance for us? Marco looked toward the kitchen where Lily laughed while teaching a chef how to sprinkle cheese correctly. Then he turned back to Vanessa. And for the first time, she realized his eyes no longer belonged to her. I hope you find happiness someday, he said sincerely. Then he walked away. Vanessa sat alone at the table while the love she abandoned disappeared forever into the warm light of the kitchen. And only then did she understand the cruelest truth in the world. Some people are poor with money. Others are poor with choices. And sometimes, the second kind never recovers.